These are 8 vintage watches that horological experts call criminally undervalued in 2026. The ones the money forgot on its way back into Rolex. There's a specific reason they're cheap right now, and it starts with a crash. To see the opportunity clearly, you first have to understand what wrecked this market. Across 2020 and 2021, the pre-owned watch world tipped into a speculative frenzy that peaked in April of 2022, and then the floor gave way. The Bloomberg Subdial Watch Index, which tracks the 50 most traded watches by value, fell 42% from that April 2022 high by October of the following year. Watch charts counted 10 straight quarters of decline. This wasn't a dip, it was a full correction that emptied a lot of pockets. By 2024 and into early 2025, prices finally bottomed out and began climbing again, but the rebound arrived unevenly. Patek Philippe led all of 2025 with a gain of 7.7%, while Rolex, Audemars Piguet, Cartier, Omega, and Grand Seiko clawed their way back as well. Here's the part that matters. In the second quarter of 2025, 29 of 35 tracked Swiss brands were still falling. The money returned, but it flowed almost entirely toward the so-called Big Three, which left everything else sitting there, comparatively cheap. That gap is the whole opportunity. Let's start at the bottom of the market, under $1,000. The Seiko 6139, nicknamed the Pogue, ranks among the first automatic chronographs ever built, and astronaut William Pogue wore one aboard Skylab 4 back in 1973, which is where the name comes from. You can spot them listed on Chrono24 from around $530, averaging close to $1,000. Sharing that same bracket is the Girard-Perregaux Gyromatic. One dealer priced a 1960 example at a mere £725, noting that stacked against Rolex, Jaeger-LeCoultre, and IWC from the same era, good vintage Girard-Perregaux carries technical substance the price simply doesn't reflect. Climbing into the $1,000 to $5,000 range, and vintage starts to get genuinely interesting. Gérald Genta designed the Universal Genève Polerouter in 1954, the same man who would later create the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, and he was only 23 years old when he drew it up for Scandinavian Airlines and their transpolar route. Steel examples change hands around $2,000 to $3,000. A live catalyst sits underneath this one too, because Breitling bought the dormant Universal Genève brand in December of 2023 and formally relaunched it in early 2026, and revivals like that tend to pull attention and prices back toward the vintage originals. This bracket holds more than one sleeper. Vintage Grand Seiko and King Seiko both get described as dramatically undervalued next to their Swiss contemporaries. The Enicar Sherpa belongs here as well, built with EPSA super compressor cases and in-house movements, where authentic pieces stretch from $500 all the way up to $22,000. The Enicar collector community says it best, pointing out that Sherpa prices never crashed to rock bottom, yet never inflated into a bubble either. Stable, respected, and quietly overlooked. Now, to the top tier, $5,000 and above, where the connoisseurs shop. Vintage Longines chronographs lead that conversation. Philips calls the caliber 13ZN, launched in 1936, and the 30CH unanimously among the finest chronograph movements of the entire mid-20th century. Here's a detail that lands harder. Philips notes that A. Lange and Söhne drew inspiration from that Longines 13ZN when building the movement inside their legendary datograph. Top examples carried estimates of $20,000 to $40,000, and collectors still call them criminally undervalued. Then comes the Zenith El Primero, which launched in 1969 as the first automatic chronograph movement, beating at 36,000 vibrations per hour, and its movement later found a home inside early Rolex Daytonas. The tricolor A386, of which roughly 2,500 were ever made, changed hands across 2025 anywhere from $13,000 to $29,000. One publication branded its design criminally undersold, pointing out that search interest for the watch runs at less than 1% of the volume people give to Daytona. That comparison cuts to the heart of it. Take the Universal Genève Compacts, the Panda Dial chronograph, nicknamed the Nina Rint, produced from 1964 to 1967, and people forever measure it against the far pricier Rolex Paul Newman Daytona. As one observer put it, The Compax hasn't fallen victim to the mad whirlwind of its Rolex rival, and recent auction results landed around $17,000 to $20,000. The Rolex equivalent runs many multiples higher. Why haven't buyers already cleared these shelves? Because vintage carries real, structural risk, and this is the honest part. The Frankenwatch is the sharpest danger, a piece assembled from mismatched or replacement parts, or dressed up with a fake redial. Eric Wind, who founded Wind Vintage after leaving Christie's, said it plainly. It's a complete Wild West, especially when you're not an expert. The odds are very high you will buy something that's fake or not correct. None of this is theoretical, because an Omega Seamaster that hammered at Phillips in 2021 for over $3 million was later reported to be a Frankenwatch. Vintage Seiko and Omega Seamasters get faked most often, precisely because the originals were everywhere. Ownership costs bite too. One 30-year dealer places the real value sweet spot for 2026 between £500 and £3,000, because anything under $500 likely needs a service running £200 to £400, which quietly eats your margin whole. Originality, condition, and buying from people you trust matter far more than the name printed on the dial. Even the diehards can see these aren't guaranteed investments, and as one collector wrote, if long-term returns are the goal, the S&P 500 is the safer bet, which brings us back to where we started. That 2022 crash and the lopsided recovery carved out a genuine gap, and the Matthew Bain 2026 outlook captures it exactly. An $8,000 watch with real historical merit now outranks a $25,000 watch with a little story to tell. Middle market names once treated as stepping stones, Longines, Universal Genève, IWC, are turning into deliberate acquisitions. The undervalued watches of 2026 were never a secret. They're the ones the recovery skipped, the pieces with the history, the movements, and the stories, still waiting for the market to remember they exist.